Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to the team at the Paris Peace Forum for providing this discussion today. My name is Ian Christensen. I am the Director of Private Sector Programs for the Secure World Foundation. For those of you who do not know us, Secure World Foundation is a nonprofit organization based in the United States. We focus on the issue of space sustainability and providing cooperative dialogues towards achieving space sustainability. For us, space sustainability is essentially how does the global community continue to operate in and benefit from a stable orbital environment. One of the ways that we as a global community benefit from space and space systems are the applications and services that space provides, such as communications and remote sensing, and the ways those are used in society. Currently, we are seeing a fundamental change in the way those services are provided. Companies, sometimes with government support, are planning, filing for, and launching constellations of LEO satellites for both communications and remote sensing purposes. These constellations total hundreds to tens of thousands of satellites in each individual constellation and are increasingly being launched into the low Earth orbit environment. These constellations, while they provide services, they add to they come into an environment in which there's an existing population of legacy objects and an existing collision risk from debris and those legacy objects, and these constellations add their own complexities to that environment. Regulatory and operator coordination processes are challenged by this pace of activity. In this more complex and changing domain, the knowledge of the space environment becomes increasingly important, and practices to assess and manage collision risk become more of a priority. Working Group 2 under the Paris Peace Forum Net Zero Space Initiative focused on advancing international efforts towards a more interoperable way of stipulating and assessing the existence of collision risk in orbit, and on clearer and more transparent protocols for collision avoidance maneuvers, and for coordination between operators, and it also focused on advancing the understanding of the carrying capacity of Earth's orbits. The recommendations coming out of this working group focus on a number of things. Broadly, improving risk assessment at the aggregate level, advancing work on modeling orbital carrying capacity, improving availability and accessibility and quality of space situational awareness data, and then various steps to improve coordination and communication between satellite operators of all types. Our roundtable this morning is to discuss these recommendations, the path forward towards implementing them, the path forward towards developing additional recommendations and additional practices. So fundamentally today, our discussion will be about the necessary steps to ensure the safe and economical use of Earth's orbit as a resource, while enabling and protecting the ability to have future users and uses access that resource. Our discussion today will proceed in a roundtable format, as is typical here at the Paris Peace Forum. We'll start with a couple of introductory remarks and cover two focus areas. Those two focus areas, the first issue we're going to discuss developing reference modeling to assess risks in orbit, and talk about a multi-stakeholder proposal to develop those modeling resources. And then the second issue we'll consider is coordinating efforts in the short term, some of the recommendations that come up under Advisory Working Group 2, under the Working Group 2 under the Paris Peace Forum Net Zero Initiative. And there is a white paper that has been produced by this group, and we're here to discuss that today. So I wanted to begin by introducing the four speakers at the table that will be giving our initial remarks, and then we'll cover the first issue, and then after a brief discussion, we'll move to the second issue. So for our first issue, developing reference modeling to assess risks in orbit, our two initial contributions will be from Jean-Philippe Arsenault, who is the Chief of Public Relations Strategy at North Star Earth and Space. Jean-Philippe leads global public affairs and communications at North Star, where he brings over 2 decades of government and private sector experience in partnerships, advancing complex initiatives, and navigating geopolitical dynamics. The second initial speaker under the first issue will be Pascal Fachet, who is the chair for the European Space Surveillance and Tracking Initiative, EUSST. His experience includes 19 years in various positions at CNES, the French Space Agency, as an international relations advisor and program manager. Within the last 10 years, Pascal has been responsible for topics such as space security, SSA, and space situational or space surveillance. Pascal is a French delegate to the EU SSA Program Council, to the International, the IADC, the Interagency Space Debris Coordination Committee Steering Group, and to the same page, I believe that is, the SMPAG Steering Committee, and has also been a UN COPUOS delegate. For our second issue set, which is coordinating efforts in the short term on the net zero policy recommendations, our first initial speaker will be John Janka, who is the Chief Officer for Global Government Affairs and Regulatory at Viasat. For more than 25 years, John has counseled international clients as a partner at Latham & Watkins LLP, focusing on the telecommunications, media, and technology sector, and has served as a delegate to the ITU World Radio Communication Conference in Geneva, and joined Viasat in 2020 as Chief Officer for Global Government Affairs and Regulatory. Our second speaker in the second issue will be Mr. Zhang Yao, who is the advisor for Chongguang Satellite Technology, CGSTL, a Chinese satellite operator. Mr. Zhang also serves at the National Astronomical Observatories of the Chinese Academy of Sciences. So with that introduction, Jean-Philippe, I will turn to you to provide your initial remarks on the topic of reference modeling. Thank you.
Thank you. So yes, my name is Jean-Philippe. I work with Northstar Earth and Space. Northstar is in the space situational awareness business, launching its first satellites next year, mid-2023, for space-based SSA. I'm honored to be part of this forum and this discussion. I want to thank the Paris Peace Forum and the members of this group for this hard work, but the Paris Peace Forum for recognizing the issue as key. And there are many other issues in the peace discussions, an urgent one, but most Earth inhabitants use space on a daily basis, as you all know, but the thing is, most decision makers in our societies are not aware of that and not enough. So we have urgent work to do to make them realize that space debris threatens this way of life and in an urgent way. So I think the work we do is a brick in this wall. To set the table for our discussion, I would humbly offer to separate some of the recommendations that are in the paper in two buckets. So I would say that in one bucket falls improvements to the current way of doing things in space. And in that bucket, you could put better channels for communication, points of contact, standards for satellite maneuverability, and rules of the roads. These are not easy tasks. They involve many decision makers, many organizations, nationally, internationally, the industry. But I would qualify them as improvements to the way things work now. In another bucket, I think we identify an information gap or a fundamental, some fundamental known unknowns about what's in front of us or what's over our heads. And in there, I would put a way to better define the carrying capacity of our orbits. What is too much traffic given what's up there and what's coming up there and the technologies we have now and will be coming up would be one known unknown. And a second one is that we need better SSA. We need to know what goes on up there in a more precise way, in a more timely way. And that is something we know, that we don't know everything about what's going on, and we certainly do not have enough sensor and good ones for for what is coming up in space and what's in front of us. So I believe these two unknowns are fundamental to not only understand what goes on and prepare the future, but also to feed what we discussed yesterday, better regulations and how we regulate what goes on in space. So on this, thank you. I'm honored to be here and contribute today.
Thank you, Jean-Philippe. So, Pascal, to you.
Thank you, Jan, for having me here, and good morning, everyone. I would like to express my appreciation to the Paris Peace Forum for organizing this important conversation on the topic of collision avoidance, as it was already underlined, and I'm very pleased to reconnect with colleagues and friends from the industry, government, research institution, consulting companies. I mean, this dialogue is very important. So quickly, I have two announcements to make today. Let's have some fresh news on our side in Europe. First, I would like to take the advantage of this forum, which provides a platform of discussion on matters of global governance, to announce you that as of yesterday, 11 November, the partnership of 15 member states of the European Union on space surveillance and tracking has been officially formed. So the 15 member states have signed the partnership agreement. So the governance in Europe is now in place, in force. And in addition to France, Germany, Italy, Poland, Portugal, Romania, and Spain, I'm very pleased to here have 8 new countries joining the adventure: Austria, Czech Republic, Denmark, Finland, Greece, Sweden, Latvia, and the Netherlands. So it's done. So this multilateral cooperation is very important in Europe. It's at the intersection of space safety and space security. It's growing very rapidly. This is the signal also of a high political awareness for more SSA, more STM, better SSA, I agree, and the need to provide high-quality collision avoidance services, which is really the topic of our discussion today. And this topic should be, of course, our top priority in a more and more congested environment. We need to ensure safe space operations and to contribute all together to the long-term sustainability of outer space activities. And thank you very much, Jan, as Secure World Foundation, to always promote sustainability in space. Thank you. The second announcement, as you know, in Europe, in EU SST, we already protect 311 satellites from risk of collision. Those satellites are in Europe right now, and our intention is to open the collision avoidance service worldwide as of 1st January 23, and we're going to follow a progressive and ramp-up approach. So we're going to open the service very progressively, and we are doing this for several reasons. The first reason, it's a political decision in Europe, which is the result of a decision made by the 27 member states, the European Parliament, the Council of the European Union, and the European Commission, following Article 8 of the regulation establishing the European Union Space Programme. So we have to do that. This is legal. But we also consider that there's a need for a fundamentally public collision avoidance service to ensure a minimum level of safety in space. This is, I think, what in the US you call an inherently governmental function. And indeed, our assessment is that one major catastrophic collision in space would generate thousands, even millions of new debris, and would therefore endanger all space activities for a very long period of time. So we have also been very much inspired by the choice of the United States in 2010, when you decided in the US to inform all operators in the world of risk of collisions free of charge, and therefore in Europe we are pursuing this effort, contributing therefore to the global burden sharing in SSA. So our common objective, again, is to avoid any catastrophic collision in space. The last one, as you know, happened in 2009 between Iridium and Cosmos. It shall never happen again. So this is very important. Of course, we have a vibrant and very dynamic industry and startup commercial ecosystem in Europe, and we will rely very much on them. They are essential in our endeavor. We want to heavily rely on commercial data and innovative commercial sensors to provide those public services. So this will not change, and on the contrary, it's going to be increased very, very much. And in addition, we will also encourage in Europe and promote and support an ecosystem of lucrative, advanced, more accurate, and tailor-made commercial services that may rely on the basic services that we provide as a public service. So our goal is really to foster also innovation and competitiveness of the industry and startup in Europe. So with that, I gave you in a few minutes an overview of where we are right now. Thank you very much.
And thank you for that, Pascal. It's good to hear some news and announcements there. I think that's a significant step forward for the SSD program, so good to hear that. So both Jean-Philippe and Pascal have given us some things to think about in terms of next steps here, right? In terms of what do we mean when we say improved SSA? What are we talking about there? What are we talking about when we say capacity, carrying capacity, and how we assess that? So as these programs develop, as governments take their steps, as industry brings capabilities, curious from the rest of the assembled experts here, any viewpoints, any reactions to what our two introductory speakers just introduced to us? Any viewpoints on the necessary steps to develop further models to implement some of these suggestions? So if anyone wishes to take the floor, please, Sir Miguel.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you again to Paris Peace Forum to organize these sessions and these aspects connected to the space debris. I was just in another session. I will not insist again on the problem. I think we are aware, all of us, about the issue. And I will two topics I would like to highlight. The first one, here today we are talking about collision avoidance, and the first topic that we need to stress and to improve is the cooperation. When we have two objects which are approaching, and if they are cooperative objects, then we have two entities which are involved, and then we need to find a way to ease interchange information between them and to ease manage the data that we need to define for this collision avoidance or maneuvers or whatever we need to compute to avoid the problem. Today we are providing already services in the commercial market for telecom operators in this area, and I will say it's not always easy. When we detect problems, it's not always easy the way to which we exchange information with the other between the operators, and we try to detect or to minimize the impact. Then in this way, we need also to standardize the way in which we define the models that we would like to exchange between the different people involved in the different stakeholders involved in this, and also all the aspects connected to the data management, data policy. We have problem of confidentiality sometimes behind. Also the business is also relevant, and sometimes operators say, I don't want to do it because it's affecting my business, I will reduce the lifetime of my satellite, then it's your problem. Then this is also connected to what we were saying yesterday. The rules are a legal aspect that we need to connect to this aspect on data analysis. And the second point is technology. I'm happy to hear about the USST evolution, which is perfect. And we cannot stop on the development of technology. We need to improve the accuracy and the level of knowledge that we have today about the debris which are flying. Now, in this case, more connected to the non-cooperative objects. And also to see and to look for the future for new technologies that we can incorporate. In this sense, for example, we are today involved in activities related to projects called CREAM, which are targeting the possibility to move the analysis and the computation of maneuver that we are doing today on ground, to move it to the satellites and to do it in an autonomous way. This obviously will improve capabilities in the observation. We are closer to the debris. And second, in the reaction time. And then, here I am talking more about probably science fiction today, but projects are starting, analysis are starting, ESA is involved in this aspect, and probably in a near future we can talk about this. But I would like to insist on the need to improve the technology that we have today. We have been doing a lot of efforts. USST is a very good example of this, but there is still a lot of activities and work to be done.
All right, yeah, thank you, Miguel. And just for the audience, Miguel was with GMV, so you guys were that. So technology changes and how we build that into our systems. That's one of the themes you're talking about there. And then the need for interoperability and sharing of common standard and references points. So I want to turn maybe to some of our other SSA companies here. So Romain or Arun, if you have a, yeah.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you, everyone. Very, very honored to be here today. Yeah, from Share My Space point of view, there are two areas in terms of technologies that are extremely important. The first one is really bridging the gap of lethal, non-trackable objects. So all these objects between 1 and 10 centimeter of size that are currently untracked, that are causing a very serious threat to orbiting satellites. So developing sensor technologies that are able to bridge this gap and therefore manage space traffic management at another level, because while the US catalog currently contains about 30,000 objects, when you speak about objects larger than 1 centimeter, you're speaking about 1 million objects. So the entire data architectures need to be designed with that kind of size in mind. The second aspect is really data fusion. We've spoken about collision warnings, collision alerts, but when you have two independent sensors that you trust both, that tell you a different story, right? One is going to tell you the danger is to the left, you should maneuver to the right. The other sensor tells you the danger is to the right, should maneuver to the left. We've got two warnings. What are you going to do? You got to stay in the middle? Some operators do that today because there's no proper data fusion algorithms, neither in terms of merging orbital state vectors or collision data messages, collision warnings. So I think these two areas are extremely important in terms of technology development. And of course, merging data is also related to coordination and cooperation between actors. So I emphasize once again the points raised by Miguel in that regard.
Good morning, I am Anirudh from Digantara. I represent an Indian space situational awareness company, and I totally resonate with what my friend told about the technological challenges that are there today before even we get into the governance of it. Because there is a huge data gap that needs to be filled in this particular sector, because we have a catalog of around 35,000, 40,000 objects, but there is still a lot to do, for which we require sensors. And like he said, data fusion will be a very crucial aspect of this. Data fusion and sensor fusion, both industries and governments have to work together in terms of filling this huge gap that is already there in the industry, and come to a common consensus where we kind of work on an open architecture that even the US government has proposed, where we can get data from several sensors, be it space-based, ground-based, and the most important part of this is to understand the accuracy of the data. So today, we get TLEs, but that's not enough because we don't get the standard deviation or covariance of the data sets that we have, which makes it much difficult in terms of understanding whether the data that we're getting is trustworthy or not. So that needs to be there to kind of enhance the current ecosystem that is there in the space situational awareness domain. And it is a multi-country effort, I would say, because at this point in time when space-faring nations are building capabilities for several things, launching satellites, there is also a need for building sovereign capabilities to a particular nation or on a global scale to solve the problem of space traffic management, and the policy and the technological know-how is very important to kind of solve this particular problem.
So thank you both and everyone there. So adding to the list that Miguel gave us, we have data fusion, we have technical accuracy, we have, I would add, in the white paper talks about this, is different thresholds for action within different operators. So the probability of collision and then the point at which one operator might choose to act is a different across different operators, right? So what level of risk, what level of probability of collision are different operators willing to accept or act at? All of this suggests the need for further coordination, further interoperability discussions, and further interactions between multi-stakeholder groups like this. So with that, I want to turn now to our second issue that we're considering at this roundtable, and that is the recommendations contained under the Net Zero Initiative White Paper 2 on coordinating efforts in the short term for a possible path forward. And so, John, I want to start with you with your introductory perspectives here.
All right, thank you very much, Ian, and good morning, everyone. I see two main steps toward achieving greater international cooperation on the crisis we face, which is the increasing rate and the growth of debris that's occasioned by more intensive use of LEO. I think the first step is agreeing on two things: the relevant metrics, and the relevant tactics. And by that, I mean, in terms of metrics, we need to decide, what it is specifically we want to achieve. And I think one of those things is called out in the Working Group 2 report, and that is capping the risk of collisions on a per-system basis. There needs to be some acceptable limit on how much risk can be created by a given system. And I think that's important because of human nature, is that System A, who gets up first, may have different incentives than System B, who comes second. And that may be different risk profiles, and it may just be human nature to try to exclude others by raising their costs of entry. I also would like to comment on the issue of LNT. I think that's a really important issue. And despite all of the work of Working Group 2, we don't really have a solution to that. And that's another reason I think we need to be capping the risk of collisions, because this has been described as the fastest growing category of debris and one that dominates the risk profile of constellations. So unless and until we have all the new technologies we need to manage this, I think we need to start with some type of a limit. And we also need to think about our core tactics and their relative effectiveness. I see broadly three categories. I think they're described in the Working Group 2 report. One is improved satellite design and responsible constellation operation. Another one is improved STM and SSA, as we've been discussing. And another one is cleanup, as we discussed yesterday. I think each of those elements could be helpful, but from my perspective, better STM and SSA and cleanup are not a panacea, and nor are better operational protocols a panacea. And one of the reasons is, as we all know, there are inherent uncertainties in maneuvering. And as we discussed yesterday, the law of very large numbers indicates that if there are massive numbers of low-risk events, we still have a chance of very bad results happening. So I think the best way to evaluate all of this, again, is modeling, data-based modeling that takes into account the carrying capacity of LEO, that deals with the interrelationship between an ever-evolving debris flux field and more intensive use of LEO. We know that's happening, we need to factor it in, and we need to understand how they fit together. But I also think it's critical that, I'm going to tie this back to Working Group 1, that we need to tie this to regulations, and in particular market access regulations. We need some types of conditions that manage this aggregate risk, unless and until we get to a point in the future where technology is perfected and we don't have to worry about it anymore. And I do think this starts with like-minded administrations cooperating. It has to start with a handful of administrations who are spacefaring nations who lead these initiatives. And I do think that the economic incentives in market access decisions can be very powerful tools. Conditions in market access decisions that encourage operators to do the right thing, because as I said before, everyone may not have the same natural incentives. I know there's been some discussion about developing international standards, and while I think that's laudable, I think we have to realize the power of individual countries taking leadership. We've seen that already in terms of the United States recently adopting a 5-year deorbiting rule, which notably applies to every satellite system that serves the United States. It doesn't matter if you're licensed by the United States or the UK or France or Germany or Brazil, you're held to that rule that the United States has unilaterally adopted. So I think one of the challenges is to get other like-minded nations to adopt a relatively simple rule on aggregate collision risk. And one of the key things, I believe, is that the design choices should be left to the operators, how they achieve that risk threshold. I don't think we need to be defining specific technologies, but we rather should be saying, here's a risk profile that's acceptable, show me how you get there, and then I will let you serve my nation. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Some discussion points there to come back to, I think, but Mr. Yao, I now wish to turn to you for your perspectives.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Very good, yes.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Zhang Yao, advisor of Changguang Satellite Technology Company. Also is associate professor in National Astronomical Observatories of Chinese Academy of Science. CGSTL is one of the largest space commercial companies in China. Jilin-1 satellite constellation is a co-project under construction by CGSTL. And we plan to launch about 300 satellites. CGSTL is very concerned about collision avoidance and long-term space sustainability. All satellites launched by CGSTL have been strictly reviewed for space debris mitigation, collision avoidance, and re-entry plan at the end of life. I'm very glad that the Paris Peace Forum proposed net zero space initiative and provide opportunities for space commercial companies to participate in discussing the long-term sustainability of space. It's a good start that the white paper mentioned 9 suggestions in 5 aspects. Based on those recommendations, I have the following personal views. On one hand, the understanding and the calculation method of space carrying capacity, collision avoidance the threshold, and also collision risk estimation, orbit calculation, and the prediction model are not the same in this time. In future, we need to continue carry out research, conduct extensive technical exchange, and uniform standards. On the other hand, the UN-USA and IDC are a good platform for international cooperation. These organizations compose of professionals from various countries and have a successful operation experience. It suggests that the strengthened communication and coordination with UN-USA and IDC in the future, and gradually adopt some recommendations of PPF into rules or norms. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So, with those initial introductory remarks in mind, balancing what we do at the multilateral level versus what we do at national administrations, the role of responsible operations principles, the role of models, the role of reducing debris. How do we balance these things? What is the path forward for implementing some of these recommendations? So as we've done before, sort of open it up to the floor, and in particular kind of interested in any additional operator perspectives on this viewpoint. Okay, anybody?
Yes, thank you, Jan. I'm very honored to be here on behalf of Ariane Space. We are the European launch service provider, and we are used to say our role basically consists on opening roads through space and towards the orbit, maybe close to the Earth or farther. I think our responsibility is to leave these roads practicable and open and not congested. And we are still operating under one of the most restrictive regulations, which is the French Space Operation Law. I think this is, we think this is definitely not enough, and we, John, you mentioned earlier the needs for regulations, and we definitely concur with that. Romain, you mentioned that we are talking about millions of objects up there, and this is a question of keeping our business sustainable. And we call for more regulation. We are at a crossroads where we have the choice to leave this natural resource, which is space, free for future business or not. And yes, we all concur that regulations may sound sometimes like constraint to the business, but I think and we believe in the fact that if there are no regulations now, there won't be any business any longer and for a very long period of time.
Thank you. So need for regulation as an enabler for business is I think part of what you're arguing, but we're also thinking about this system as a resource. I think is something we're hearing out of multiple remarks there. So thank you for that. Just looking around, yeah, Simon.
Yeah, hi everyone. So my name is Simon. I work for Euroconsult. So we are an independent consulting firm. So we're not an operator or an SSA provider. So no skin in the game. I just wanted to make a quick point on kind of the previous topic. I think it was addressed and mentioned here and there, but kind of emphasizing the point of interoperability. Data fusion was mentioned, and so, but it's not enough to just produce the data. It needs to be accessible and useful for operators. So we see things like, for example, the Unified Data Library. But this is kind of a Space Force initiative. So maybe having kind of a civilian SSA-specific type of unified data library, which ensures that the data is interoperable, easy to access, and kind of facilitates the job of combining the data fusion aspect. So a quick point on that. And the second point on this topic was to respond to the carrying capacity point. I think is quite an interesting one. So we see things similarly done in kind of the orbital slots. It's kind of a finite resource. The frequency rights and spectrum, it's kind of a finite resource. And so how do we quantify it and ensure that it's used, shared equitably? So I think it's an admirable approach, but kind of raising some flags in the sense that the carrying capacity would be, of course, elastic in the sense that depending on technology, you can look at sort of the metaphor of if you have, trying to fit a disorganized crowd in a narrow alley versus having kind of an organized marching band, you can fit more people. And so I think if satellites are speaking to each other, if they're kind of interoperable and so on, communicating with each other, the carrying capacity could increase versus if they're kind of disorganized, there's lower. So the carrying capacity would never be kind of a panacea solution you mentioned. It's kind of it would be a range. So there are kind of some limitations to this. And then also looking forward, looking at the number of satellites to be launched, something like 3,000 per year in the next decade, a huge amount of these are US satellites. So US kind of represents a preponderant force. 80% of all upcoming satellites are essentially concentrated in 3 or 4 mega constellations, most of which are American. And so there's also, if we want to kind of equitably share the limited resource, how to do so in a way which doesn't disadvantage a specific player. So anyway, more opening the topic there.
Yeah, so thank you for that. Amber?
Thank you, and I want to thank the Paris Peace Forum for having me today. It's an honor to be here with so many colleagues. after a pretty significant time, so thank you for the invitation. My name is Amber Charlesworth. I'm the Senior Manager for Space Policy at Project Kuiper at Amazon. This is our first time here having these discussions, and again, thank you for that. I was going to read a few prepared remarks and then react to a couple of the comments around the table. But first, I will start with not being part of the working group. We look forward to reading the working group's report in great detail, studying it, and come back to the group to provide more input. Thank you. Project Kuiper is Amazon's broadband satellite network, a constellation of just over 3,000 satellites in low Earth orbit, combined with customer terminals, gateway stations, and global networking and infrastructure. Our mission is to provide fast, affordable broadband to underserved and unserved communities around the world. We support the net zero space goal of safe space operations and long-term sustainability of space. It is the foundation for a robust and innovative space industry. In fact, space safety is a core tenet of our design. I won't go through our constellation design or our satellite design, but what I will talk through and touch on is our operational plans. We will conduct active collision avoidance during every phase of the mission and share ephemeris data, working with other operators to coordinate operational protocols to help determine how each should respond to and mitigate conjunction risks. We believe that operators should know where other operators are, what they are planning to do, and when they are planning to do it. We are already engaging with other constellation operators preparing to coexist responsibly in LEO. We support the development of standards and best practices, mechanisms to make data sharing more efficient, and automation of collisions avoidance decisions. Such measures and cooperation between stakeholders are essential. We are committed to the net zero space goal of safe space operations and the long-term sustainability of space, which is essential for satellites to provide important services such as broadband internet with their significant economic and societal benefits. Project Kuiper is a great example of how Amazon is using its scale to solve big, important problems for the world. We still have a lot of work ahead, but we are optimistic about the difference it can make for customers and communities around the world. Again, I thank you for the opportunity to be here. At this point, we'll just comment on a couple of the remarks made around the table by our colleagues. When it comes to regulations versus best practices and voluntary methods, I think we just need to continue to have discussions on where the balance is. How do we not move too quickly into regulation where we stifle innovation and technology, but while understanding that operators need and business models need transparency and predictability moving forward. And then I like what my colleague Simon said about carrying capacity and then the need to understand that it could be elastic in sorts. And so I think more discussion on what that looks like moving forward would be also of great importance to this group. And I thank you again very much, Ian.
Thank you, Amber. So we have about 15 minutes left in our conversation today. So I have a couple of questions I can go into, but let's go around the room. John.
Thank you, Ian. I just want to comment on carrying capacity to make sure my marks are not misconstrued. I'm not suggesting that carrying capacity is inelastic. To the contrary, I believe we can think of carrying capacity as a cylinder, and it has so much volume. And the question is, how do we efficiently fill the cylinder? And maybe an analogy is if I have a glass cylinder, I can put 6 apples in it, but I can fit 300 grapes. And that's the way I'm thinking about carrying capacity in space. How do we, knowing there are limits to what we can do, how do we most efficiently use that so we can maximize opportunities for everyone and provide room for growth and innovation in the future?
Yeah, thank you, John. So actually, that was one of the points I wanted to kind of see if we could draw out a little bit more is the discussion of carrying capacity around this table and in the white paper. How could that be a useful reference point or a useful tool to think about the future use of the domain, right? So to ensure that we can enable new users to come into the space domain and that resource is available. So I wonder if anybody has a further thought on that aspect of carrying capacity and then the work in the white paper. Jeff Leap.
Well,
related to this, I don't think it can be definitive, and I think that's what John indicated. And in that sense, I think it's the concept that needs to be put on the table, but it is to be elastic and technology. I mean, I heard, automation, maneuverability. Well, for this, you need good data, garbage in, garbage out. I mean, you need, and I hear transparency between operators in LEO. It is to be expected that some operators will not provide that transparency, and space debris does not provide information on their location. So to me, it goes back to this information gap of better understanding of what is where, with different sources being merged. So big challenge, but that is how we feed also the concept of carrying capacity, and it is to our benefit at all. So it is elastic.
So I'll go to Julien and then Romain. Julien?
Yes, thank you. I see that as at a company level. So we help provide good regulations for others, and that's why we're here and how we work with you guys at the forum. We are going to launch a satellite, so we will be bound by the regulations we are fostering here. And as a company, we create new capacities. So for us, it really goes both ways, norms and capacities. And it's very important when you take that risk in terms of company to know what's the future going to look like, and to have a very clear vision shared by anyone else about what is the future carrying capacity is extraordinarily important. It's based on this kind of understanding of what would be the situation in 2025 and in 2030 that we have decided, for instance, not only to do space traffic management, but to add space weather and in-orbit servicing, because we're going to have a solar peak. So it's very important to know that there are going to be X amount of traffic, X amount of carrying capacity, and that makes the case to, for instance, to focus on space weather. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense if there was so few assets. So carrying capacity create the business case to create new capacities, and it's good to have norms, but we need to implement them, and so we need always both. Thank you.
Yeah, just wanted to elaborate on the comparison that you made, John, about the cylinder and the fruits. I think this is a very good comparison, actually, and the fruits is just the uncertainty, the covariance, right, that you can get. The smaller the covariance, the smaller the fruits, and this is how we transition from apples to grapes. So for that, you do need more sensor data. So if you have more sensor data, not only are you able to ensure a better safety, but you kind of increasing this orbital capacity. So the benefit is twofold. So yeah, just wanted to make this comment. Thank you.
Pascal?
Yes, I would like to support what I don't know if you can hear me. I would like to support what have been said here. We need good quality data. We need SSA data. This is our top priority right now. Regarding software methods on how you compute collision avoidance, conjunction assessment, how you perform conjunction assessment, or how you compute carrying capacity, I mean, there are plenty of different algorithms, plenty of uncertainties, different way of doing, different expertise, and the result depend on how you do the mathematics. But then we need SSA data. So we need first good SSA data, and I would like really to foster innovation. We have plenty of examples here of startup, Share My Space, Spaceable, we have industry, Ariane Group, I see GMV, so we have plenty of SSA data providers, software providers in the SSA domain. They are innovating a lot. They are with their own expertise, their own tools. So when you talk about a reference tool, I'm a bit uncomfortable because I like innovation. So what we need absolutely for spacecraft operator is really to have a very good communication, coordination, and cooperation between those operators to ensure that we won't have any catastrophic collision in orbit. Then the tools may depend, let's have some innovation here and allow those startups in the industry innovate and provide different tools with their own added value, own accuracy, and at the end of the day, the operator will decide sovereignly on what to do. So what is very important is to have point of contact, operational coordination in place, channels of communication. So this is very important in terms of reference. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you that. So the data is the baseline, right? None of this can be done without good quality data, but there are a number of levels above that, and to work on that communication, you need these points of contact, right? So with the brief amount of time we have remaining, let's see if we can follow up on that point, because the working group white paper does talk about coordination and providing POCs as part of its recommendations as well. Curious from our table and from Mr. Yao, how in an operator context do we think the best way to implement some of these contact point registries or sharing is? Because as we all know, the individuals in any given operator may change very often, right? And to try to maintain those contact points could be a data challenge in and of itself, right? So curious to see viewpoints on implementing models for establishing contact reference points for coordination. If anybody from the floor. Simon.
I mean, it's not sort of rocket science. I think you're right. If it's sort of attached to an individual point of contact, they change. There's turnover and stuff. So the obvious solution would be to kind of mandate every operator to have kind of an office or a desk, which multiple people have access to, that email box or that phone number. And so you pick up the phone, you dial one number, and it gets rerouted. That way you don't need to constantly change, and you kind of make it standardized. So that's just one possible solution.
All right, yeah, and I think, you know, registries have been suggested for those sorts of things as well, and we see varying success with registries at the international level. So I think in terms of looking for things that this group can continue to do in its future is look at, you know, implementing models for that particular recommendation as well. With 5 minutes left, I wanted to try to briefly explore one more topic. We're talking here a lot about regulation and the role of regulation and how we might balance innovation in regulation versus the need to provide that transparency and predictability, Amber, that you talked about. And many of the working group recommendations look at regulation. Yet as I look around this table, I do not see many regulators present in the room today. So what is the role of this group in reaching out to the regulatory community to help build understanding and capacity within that community to do some of these recommendations that we have? Greg?
May I answer to that question? Thank you, Ian. I think we all around the table have an important role, as you mentioned, because what we are in charge of is one of the most critical natural resources, it's space. And I think it's time for action now, and this is exactly what we are doing. And the fact that we are doing it in the frame of the Paris Peace Forum means something. It means that, again, it's critical to the humankind that we take care of this resource that is called space. And it's time for action in 3 directions, I think. The first one is understanding the situation, and this is the role you guys have with the SSA. It's time for, again, reinforced sustainable operations, and we have important customers and partners to us around the table with the JAXA, with Project Kuiper, and with Viasat, namely. We know, and as suppliers, we value the fact that you guys are operating in a responsible way. And the third is reinforced regulations, and we say it again, it's not the Far West up there, and it should not stay anything else than a space for sustainable operations regulated.
Regulators do not work in a vacuum. So you have practices, and here or at Confer Space Safety Coalition, we're all part of that. You have hard law, and France, loi sur les opérations spatiales is, for instance, going in these very good directions. You have lawyers and arbitrators, and you had in Paris last March the Paris Arbitration Week, where all the arbitrators around the world, those who decide arbitration cases about satellites, gathered and for the first time dealt with new space. And you have norms. And many of us here are working of several working groups, could be at BNAE, ISO, etc. And so the regulators, when they perform their work, it's easier for them if all these different sets of tools are already in place. And so what we do is very useful for them. And when they perform their work, and when they, for instance, agree on the license, they need to have monitoring of what they do. And that's why we create SSI capacities. So really, I think we are here at the very beginning and at the monitoring side to help regulators do the right assessment. They do not do the law, they just assess. They do the right assessment when they grant a license for such a period of time. So I think that's why we're all together on this.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, so, Miguel. Yeah.
Well, only to complete the answer, industry operators and the players, I think we have a role to define what we want to regulate. We need to help the lawyers and the people putting the rules in place to say what we need to do in one side. And the second point is we need to provide the tools and the capabilities to demonstrate that this, what we are asking for is rightly put in place and is really follow up. Because this is the key point.
All right, thank you. Well, I'm sure we could probably continue a conversation, but unfortunately the little timer in front of me is turning a bright red, so that's probably a signal to me that, that my incentive is to get off is to wrap things up. So I want to first off thank all of our participants in the roundtable for your contributions to the working group and to the discussion today in terms of themes. I think we clearly have got past the point of asking whether there's a need for action, and we see that need for action. We're talking about now here viewing LEO as a resource and managing it as a resource, which is I think a change in philosophy from how we've looked at things in the past. So that's a positive step forward, and there is clearly a need to focus on interoperability to develop these reference models. So that's clearly a step, the path to follow towards implementation. And then we talked a lot about coordination. So as the working group continues its work over the next year, trying to build on the coordination recommendations and think about how those might be implemented, I think is a clear area of emphasis. And then lastly, I think this discussion we just now had about bringing the regulatory community further into this conversation and building those tools, Julian, that you're talking about, referencing other work since it confers the Space Safety Coalition, and building this area of practice, I think is another area that, as a moderator, I might suggest that the working group take a further look at. So again, thank you to everyone here, and thank you to the Peace Forum, Maria, Jerome, and the team for providing this discussion today, and then the platform for the working group. So thank you all.